The Buddha versus Nietzsche. Can the will to power free you from suffering? Can the fierce embrace of life's struggles be the key to ending suffering, or is true freedom found in letting go of all desire? This paradox lies at the heart of two profound philosophies separated by millennia. On one hand, the Buddha teaches a will to end suffering, the idea that by extinguishing craving and ego, we can find lasting peace. On the other, Friedrich Nietzsche advocates the will to power, the idea that by affirming our will, ambition, and individuality, we can overcome suffering through strength and creation. These approaches seem worlds apart, yet both speak to a universal human question: how do we deal with suffering? In this deep dive, we'll explore the Buddha's path of compassion and renunciation versus Nietzsche's path of power and self-overcoming, to see what each can teach us about finding meaning and freedom from life's inevitable pains. Before we begin, keep in mind that this journey is not just theoretical. It's about relatable struggles, stress at work, heartbreak, identity crises, the search for purpose, and how these two thinkers might guide us. By the end, you'll have a clearer picture of the Buddha's will to end suffering and Nietzsche's will to power, and practical wisdom on applying these insights to your own life. Let's start by meeting our two protagonists and the worlds that shape their ideas. Context: two lives, two quests. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, lived in the 5th century BCE as a prince in ancient India. Sheltered in luxury, he was profoundly shaken when he first encountered aging, illness, and death outside his palace gates. Determined to find a solution to the pervasive suffering, dukkha, of life, he renounced his royal life and became a wandering ascetic. After years of extreme austerities, he realized that neither indulgence nor self-torture brings true peace. Instead, he discovered the middle way, a balanced path of ethical living, meditation, and insight. Through deep meditation under the Bodhi tree, Siddhartha attained enlightenment and became known as the Buddha, awakened one. For the next 45 years, he taught out of compassion, sharing a path to end suffering that was grounded in personal experience and critical insight. The Buddha's context was spiritual and pragmatic. He wasn't interested in abstract theology or dogma, but in diagnosing the human condition and prescribing a cure. His teachings, Dharma, focus on how our minds create suffering and how to uproot it for the sake of liberation. Friedrich Nietzsche, 1844 to 1900, by contrast, was a German philosopher and cultural critic living in a rapidly modernizing 19th century Europe. The son of a Lutheran pastor, Nietzsche grew up steeped in Christian values, but as a young man, he rejected the Christianity of his time. A brilliant philologist turned philosopher, Nietzsche was famous, or infamous, for his uncompromising attacks on conventional morality and religion. He declared, "God is dead," not to celebrate nihilism, but to highlight the moral crisis of his age, the collapse of traditional values, and the need for humanity to find or create new ones. Nietzsche's life was marked by physical illness, loneliness, and relentless intellectual courage. He was an academic prodigy who left his professorship early and wrote in relative isolation, pouring passion and personal struggle into works like Thus Spoke Zarathustra and Beyond Good and Evil. Where the Buddha spoke as a healer of the heart, Nietzsche often spoke as a provocateur and poet of the human will. He envisioned a future philosopher of the future and an ideal of the Übermensch, overman, or beyond man, who would overcome the mediocrity of the masses. In a sense, Nietzsche saw his mission as tearing down life-denying ideas and championing a bold reimagining of what a flourishing life can be. It's hard to imagine two backgrounds more different: a serene sage from ancient India teaching under trees, and a fiery modern thinker scribbling aphorisms in the Swiss Alps. Yet both the Buddha and Nietzsche were, in their own ways, physicians of the human condition. Each diagnosed what they saw as a fundamental illness of humanity and offered a path to health. For the Buddha, that illness was suffering caused by craving and ignorance, and the cure was spiritual practice leading to nirvana, the end of suffering. For Nietzsche, the illness was the decay of the human spirit under restrictive, life-denying morals, and the cure was to embrace the will to power, transforming oneself and one's values. With this context in mind, let's delve into the core of their philosophies, starting with how each understood suffering and its role in life. Understanding suffering, a noble truth versus the crucible of growth. Life is suffering. Is it a bleak curse or a call to greatness? The Buddha's very first teaching confronts suffering head-on. In the Four Noble Truths, he declares the reality of dukkha, suffering or unsatisfactoriness, and lays out its cause and cure. According to the first noble truth, life in the realm of birth and death inevitably involves suffering. Far from being a pessimistic moan, this was a frank acknowledgement of our condition. What kind of suffering did the Buddha mean? He explained it concretely. Birth is stressful, aging is stressful, death is stressful. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair are stressful. Association with the unbeloved is stressful. Separation from the loved is stressful. Not getting what is wanted is stressful. In other words, everything from obvious pains, illness, loss, to the subtle dissatisfaction we feel even when life is good, because nothing stays perfect forever, falls under dukkha. It's important to note the Buddha did not say life is only suffering. He meant that conditioned existence has an inherent unsatisfying quality. Even our pleasures and successes are impermanent and tainted by anxiety. If you reflect on your own life, this truth might ring a bell. That promotion at work brought joy, but soon new stresses emerged. A loving relationship has moments of bliss, but also conflict or the fear of loss. The Buddha boldly chose to start with this truth, not to depress us, but to spark urgency, like a doctor frankly telling a patient, "You have an illness, but there is a cure." The second noble truth identifies the cause of suffering, the craving that makes for further becoming. Craving for sensual pleasure, craving for becoming, craving for non-becoming. In Pali, the word is tanha, literally thirst, an incessant craving or greedy desire for things to be a certain way. This includes obvious desires like sensual lust or greed for money, but also subtle desires. The craving to be something, to attain status, identity, or the craving to not be, to avoid pain, to annihilate oneself, or aspects of life one can't face. According to the Buddha, this thirst arises from ignorance of reality and keeps us caught in samsara, the cycle of rebirth and continual dissatisfaction. Simply put, we suffer because we feverishly cling. We cling to youth as we age, to loved ones who will change or die, to ideas of how things should be, even as life throws curveballs. And especially we cling to the notion of I, me, mine. The Buddha saw that craving and attachment are like a fire burning in the mind, driving us to endless grasping and frustration. If you've ever felt that hollowness after chasing a goal and wondering, is this it? Or the insatiability of wanting the next pleasure or achievement, you've tasted this truth. The good news is the Buddha doesn't stop at diagnosis. the third noble truth proclaims that cessation of suffering is possible. And this, monks, is the noble truth of the cessation of stress, the remainderless fading and cessation, renunciation, relinquishment, release, and letting go of that very craving. In a word, the cure for suffering is nirvana, which means extinguishing, like putting out a flame. What gets extinguished is the burning of craving and ignorance. This is not a nihilistic void, but a state of profound peace and freedom. When craving is gone, the Buddha said, suffering stops, just as a fire dies when its fuel is exhausted. Finally, the fourth noble truth lays out the path to this cessation, the Noble Eightfold Path, which we will explore in detail later. For now, note how the Buddha's understanding of suffering is therapeutic. Suffering is a problem to be solved through understanding and disciplined practice. His approach is often likened to a physician's four-step process. Identify the disease, dukkha, find its cause, craving, determine the prognosis, it can end, and prescribe a cure, the path. Now, enter Nietzsche, who also places suffering front and center, but with a dramatically different valuation. Nietzsche, with his often cryptic and fiery style, essentially asks, what if suffering isn't merely an illness to cure, but also a stimulus for growth? He observes that to be alive is to face hardship. There is no avoiding it. But unlike the Buddha, Nietzsche does not conclude that suffering should be eradicated at all costs. Instead, he reframes suffering as something that can be meaningful and even necessary for human excellence. In one of his famous maxims, Nietzsche writes, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." This isn't just a catchy proverb, it captures a core aspect of his philosophy. Nietzsche suggests that enduring and overcoming challenges can increase our strength, resilience, and insight. Rather than seeing suffering only as negative, he asks us to consider how periods of struggle, heartbreak, failure, illness, might be the very forge in which a stronger self can be formed. If you think of times in your life when you faced adversity and came out wiser or tougher, you get the idea. Nietzsche is quick to add that this isn't automatic. Suffering can also break and embitter people. The key, for him, is one's attitude towards suffering. Do you resent suffering and flee from it at every turn, seeking mere comfort? Or do you face it, even embrace it, as your great teacher in life? Nietzsche sharply critiqued what he called the morality of compassion, which assumes that suffering is an absolute evil to be eliminated. He saw this mindset in both Christianity and, to some extent, the Buddhism of his day. From Nietzsche's perspective, an ethos that says suffering is bad, period, and our goal should be to relieve it universally might sound humane, but it betrays a deep misunderstanding of life's value. Why? Nietzsche argues that such a morality presumes to know that suffering has no positive role, and by rushing to comfort everyone, it could rob humanity of its highest achievements. Suffering may sometimes promote a person's growth or progress toward excellence, Nietzsche insists. Think of a great artist pouring their pain into art, or a person who survives tragedy and then helps others. In Nietzsche's eyes, these cases show that suffering can fuel depth, creativity, and strength. He accused modern culture of being too soft, too eager to avoid discomfort. In fact, Nietzsche feared a society where comfort and happiness, in the sense of mere contentment, become our highest goals. In such a society, populated by what he derisively calls the last men who shun all struggle, he foresaw mediocrity and stagnation. To Buddhism, which seeks to avoid suffering, and to all ideologies of happiness for all, Nietzsche counters that the widespread adoption of well-being would lead to the end of individualities and thus of powerful energy. In other words, if everyone aimed to simply be comfortable and pain-free, who would endure the difficult journeys that lead to greatness or innovation? Nietzsche loved to point out that creative, powerful lives often involve tension and turmoil. Only great pain is the ultimate liberator of the spirit, he wrote in another work, suggesting that challenges can awaken our highest potential. This divergence in attitude towards suffering is crucial. The Buddha sees suffering as the fire we must extinguish to find peace. Nietzsche sees suffering as the fire that can temper and strengthen us, if we have the courage to endure it. Does that mean Nietzsche wants people to suffer? Not exactly. He's not advocating masochism or cruelty for its own sake. Rather, he's saying, don't aim for a life of painless ease. Aim for a life of meaning and growth. And growth will involve some suffering, so don't curse it when it comes. In fact, Nietzsche at times almost personifies suffering as a character-building friend. He even questions compassion when it means trying to remove someone else's struggle prematurely, cautioning that saving someone from hardship might deprive them of the chance to overcome and rise stronger. This is a provocative stance, especially compared to the Buddha's great emphasis on compassion. More on that later. Nietzsche's own life of illness and isolation no doubt informed this view. He had to make sense of suffering to not succumb to despair. His answer was a kind of heroic toughness. Suffering is not the enemy. Cowardice and resignation are. In modern terms, if the Buddha is like a doctor who says, "This pain is a symptom, let's cure it," Nietzsche is like a coach who says, "No pain, no gain. Use the pain to become stronger." To illustrate, let's imagine a scenario. You lose your job unexpectedly. You feel anxious, ashamed, afraid of the future, real suffering. A Buddhist approach would encourage you to acknowledge the suffering without denial, and then investigate, what am I clinging to? I had a deep attachment to a sense of security and identity from that job. By seeing this, you might practice letting go of the idea that your worth equals your job, and find that the suffering eases. You might also practice mindfulness and compassion for yourself, neither wallowing nor running away from the discomfort. The Buddhist aim would be to use this event to loosen the ego's grip and develop equanimity. Now, a Nietzschean approach to the same scenario might say, yes, this is hard, but don't let it crush you. Let it motivate you. Can you use this setback as a challenge to reinvent yourself? Nietzsche might advise channeling the frustration into action, perhaps starting that business you truly care about or developing skills you neglected. He'd remind you that many great individuals faced failure and used it as fuel. Importantly, Nietzsche would warn, beware of self-pity. He called pity, including self-pity, a parasite on vitality, something that preserves things that are ripe for decline. In plainer words, wallowing in misery keeps you stuck, whereas willpower and creativity can turn misery into a new beginning. In sum, the Buddha and Nietzsche agree on one thing: suffering is real and central to human experience. But beyond that, their perspectives diverge dramatically. For the Buddha, suffering is a problem to be solved by understanding its causes in our own minds and diligently following a path to eliminate those causes. For Nietzsche, suffering is an inevitable reality to be faced, and potentially a gift, in that overcoming it is what gives us resilience and greatness. One might cheekily say, the Buddha seeks to end the fever of suffering. Nietzsche seeks to raise the fever until our very spirit burns hotter than the pain. As we proceed, keep this foundational difference in mind because it influences how each thinker treats topics like desire, the self, and morality. Now, let's turn to desire and ambition, seen by the Buddha as the root of suffering and by Nietzsche as the driving force of life. Desire and ambition, tanha or will to power? Desire. Is it the villain or the hero of our story? Few aspects of life escape desire and ambition, from the drive for food and love to the quest for achievement and meaning. The Buddha's stance on desire is clear and unequivocal. The wrong kinds of desire, cravings, or tanha, are the origin of suffering. In fact, the Buddha identified three major forms of craving: sensual craving, craving for existence, and craving for non-existence. Sensual craving is the obvious one, the endless hunger for pleasurable experiences, material comforts, and so on. It's the mentality of, I won't be happy until I get X, whether X is a new car, the next vacation, or a certain status. Craving for existence is a bit more subtle. It's the desire to become something, to solidify one's identity. For example, I want to be successful, to be admired, to be forever young. Craving for non-existence might sound odd, but it refers to urges like escapism or self-annihilation. For instance, I wish I could just disappear, or the desire to not experience something painful, like wanting to numb out feelings. All these, according to the Buddha, keep us trapped chasing a mirage. The tricky thing about tanha is that it's insatiable. It's like drinking salt water when thirsty. It just keeps you wanting more. Buddhist texts often compare craving to fire or to a binding chain. In one vivid image, even if it were to rain gold coins from the sky, it would not satisfy human desire. We just crave more. You might recognize this in your own life. How many times have we thought achieving something would complete us, only to find a new craving popping up? It's like a hamster wheel. The Buddha does not claim all desire is bad. This is an important nuance. In Buddhism, there is a distinction between craving, tanha, which is unwholesome, rooted in ignorance, and chanda, which can mean a wholesome desire or intention, like the desire to practice or to help others. For example, the desire for enlightenment or the desire to be compassionate are not condemned. They are part of the path. What the Buddha warns against is the burning thirst of selfish and egocentric wants, the kind that says, I must have this. I can't be happy unless the world conforms to my wishes. That sort of craving not only causes personal distress, but can lead to unethical behavior. We lie, steal, hurt others out of desire or fear. In the Buddha's analysis, chasing desire is like chasing a sunset. You run and run, but never catch up. And meanwhile, you miss the contentment available here and now. Nirvana, the goal, is often described as cooling this fire of craving, leading to profound contentment and liberation. So the Buddhist path isn't about becoming a desireless zombie. It's about letting go of compulsive craving so that one can experience peace and genuine happiness that isn't always slipping away. A modern example: suppose you have an ambition to succeed in your career. The Buddha wouldn't say, don't ever set goals or work hard. Rather, he'd ask you to examine why you want it. Is it coming from ego? I need to be better than others? Is it a restless craving? I won't feel enough until I get that title? Such motivations likely lead to stress and maybe unethical choices. But if your ambition is coming from a wholesome place, say, you want to excel in order to provide for your family or contribute to society without ego obsession, that's more skillful. Buddhism encourages mindful intention, pursuing even worldly aims in a way that's not driven by blind craving, and being able to let go when things change. Now, Nietzsche's view of desire and ambition turns the Buddhist view on its head. For Nietzsche, desire in the broadest sense is not the problem. It's the essence of life. He proposes that at the core of every living thing is a fundamental drive he calls the will to power. This concept can be misunderstood. It's not just about political power or domination, though it can include those. The will to power, as Nietzsche uses it, is the inherent urge to expand, to grow, to strengthen, to overcome obstacles. It's almost like a universal energy of ambition and assertiveness that he sees in all life. In Nietzsche's own words, even the body within which individuals treat each other as equals will have to be an incarnate will to power. It will strive to grow, spread, seize, become predominant, not from any morality or immorality, but because it is living and because life simply is will to power. This striking quote from Beyond Good and Evil captures it. Anything alive strives to grow, not because it's morally good or bad, but because it's alive, and life simply is will to power. In another note, he bluntly states, "A living thing seeks above all to discharge its strength. Life itself is will to power. Self-preservation is only one of the indirect and most frequent results thereof." Here Nietzsche is arguing against the idea that survival or static self-preservation is the primary drive. No, he says, deeper than that is the will to exert one's power, to express one's being fully. If that means growth, change, risk, so be it, even at the cost of safety. Think about what this implies. Whereas the Buddha might say, "Our desires keep us tied to suffering," Nietzsche would respond, "Our desires, our will, are what make us alive." Nietzsche looks at nature and sees not a harmonious static balance, but constant striving, plants spreading, animals competing, humans exploring and creating. He doesn't see a meaningful distinction between, say, the hunger for food, the urge to create art, or the ambition to gain knowledge. They are all expressions of the will to power taking different forms. Importantly, Nietzsche's will to power is not a license for brute domination. It includes creative power. For example, the drive of an artist to manifest a vision or a scholar's drive to understand are as much will to power as a conqueror's drive to rule. Nietzsche even suggests that altruism can be a form of will to power. The joy in giving can be an expression of one's power to help. What Nietzsche detested was not desire itself, but small, petty desires or life-denying desires. If someone's desire is merely to be comfortable and avoid any challenge, the last man syndrome, that to him is a kind of weak will, a will turned against life. But a grand desire, one that says yes to life in its fullness, including its struggles, that he praises. So where the Buddha preaches renunciation, nekkhamma in Pali, often translated as the desire for renunciation as an antidote to craving, Nietzsche preaches affirmation. Nietzsche would likely see the Buddha's renunciation of sensual pleasures and ambition as understandable in context. Nietzsche did acknowledge Buddhism as more honest and cool-headed than other religions, but ultimately, he'd label it as a kind of will to nothingness, a giving up on life's thrust. In The Antichrist, Nietzsche actually comments on Buddhism. He appreciates that Buddhism is realistic and free of theological dogma, calling it 100 times more realistic than Christianity. But he still sees it as nihilistic in that it aims to extinguish the self and desire. He writes, not without a critical bite, that Buddhism is a religion for late men, for gentle, docile races that have become overly cerebral, who feel suffering too easily. This rather scathing line shows Nietzsche's view that Buddhism appeals to those who are perhaps exhausted by life, too sensitive, seeking calm and respite. He describes the Buddhist ideal as less life to avoid suffering, which he cannot personally endorse. Nietzsche dramatically sums up what he perceives as the Buddhist refrain. Life is but suffering, they claim, and they do not lie, so ensure you cease to exist. Put an end to life which is but suffering. He's paraphrasing polemically, essentially saying Buddhism's answer is to will an end to willing, to desire not to desire anymore. And here he draws a stark line. Nietzsche does not say the Buddhists are wrong in noting life's suffering, but he believes their solution is unacceptable. He wants more life, more desire, more striving, not less. This is the collision of wills, the Buddha's will to end desire versus Nietzsche's will to elevate desire. Let's put this in a modern, relatable light. Consider the realm of ambition. Say you have a dream to start a company or become an actor. The Buddha might ask, examine this desire. Is it causing you stress? Is it coming from ego, wanting fame or wealth? If the pursuit is making you anxious, perhaps practice non-attachment to the outcome. Pursue it if it's wholesome, but be ready to accept whatever happens. Don't let the desire own you. Buddhism would encourage a kind of detachment even as you work toward your goal. Do the work diligently, but try not to obsess or hinge your whole identity on it. If you fail, you won't be devastated because you weren't clinging. If you succeed, you accept it without letting pride inflate you. On the other hand, Nietzsche might say, fantastic, you have a bold ambition. Embrace it fully. Pour yourself into it. That fire in your belly to achieve is the very energy of life. Don't be ashamed of your will to excel. It's noble. It's your strength wanting to manifest. And if obstacles come, use them as stepping stones. Nietzsche would likely scorn a half-hearted or timid approach. He might warn you not to listen to mediocrity that says, "Oh, don't aim too high." In his eyes, great things are achieved by great desire. He even had a term for a kind of overflowing life force, Dionysian, symbolized by the Greek god Dionysus, representing exuberance, creativity, even excess. While the Buddha extolled the middle way, balance and moderation, Nietzsche sometimes extolled a path of excess, at least for the strong, as a way of breaking past limits. Examine your ambitions, he might say. Are they truly yours or just what society taught you? If they are yours, then by all means pursue them unapologetically. Better to live passionately and risk falling than to never dance at all. It's worth noting that Nietzsche's will to power isn't telling everyone to become an egomaniacal tyrant. It's more psychological. Even the monk in a monastery has will to power, perhaps the power over oneself or the joy in mastering the mind. Nietzsche would interpret even the Buddha's renunciation as in some sense an expression of will. The Buddha exerted immense willpower to renounce and meditate. The difference is what they willed. The Buddha willed the cessation of craving. Nietzsche wills the enhancement of life. In one sense, both sought mastery. The Buddha master over the selfish self. Nietzsche master over the fears and herd mentality that limit the self. But practically, in daily life, Buddhism often advises cooling down the passions, whereas Nietzsche often advises heating up your inner fire. We might ask, does Nietzsche's embrace of desire have a limit? He was wary of certain desires, particularly the desire for comfort and safety above all. He coined the concept of the last man, a pathetic figure who wants nothing more than a safe, convenient life, free of conflict or great effort. Nietzsche puts in the mouth of the last men. We have invented happiness, say the last men, and they blink. These last men have no great dreams, no burning ambitions. They just want to consume and sleep, essentially. This, to Nietzsche, is one of the lowest states humanity could sink to, a stagnant pool rather than a flowing river. So in a sense, Nietzsche is against certain desires. The desire to not desire anything big, the desire to just be left alone in contentment. It's quite ironic. the thing most of us think we want, a comfortable life, Nietzsche sees as a trap, while the thing most of us fear, struggle, striving, risk, Nietzsche sees as the savior of our vitality. In this way, he inversely mirrors the Buddha. The Buddha warned against worldly desire as a trap, and Nietzsche warns against lack of desire as a trap. In summary, the Buddha treats craving, tanha, as the arch-enemy to be overcome for freedom. Desire in Buddhist practice is something to be understood, tamed, and ultimately transcended, especially the craving that centers on me and mine. Nietzsche treats desire, will, as the hero, the driving life force that we must harness and enlarge. For him, ambition is virtuous when it springs from a powerful spirit. If anything, the arch-enemy for Nietzsche is the suppression of desire, particularly when done in the name of otherworldly morals or out of fear. This paints a vivid contrast: renunciation versus ambition, letting go versus grabbing hold. And it leads us to the next topic, which lies at the heart of these differences: the very idea of self. What are we, such that we suffer or strive? The Buddha says there is no permanent self to cling to, while Nietzsche urges individuals to become their true selves. How can one philosophy say, there is no self, and the other say, be yourself magnified? Let's unpack that next. Ego and self, the anatta doctrine versus the Übermensch ideal. Who or what are you, really? This question is where the Buddha and Nietzsche offer two of the most intriguing and contrasting answers in all philosophy. On the surface, it might seem the Buddha preaches selflessness while Nietzsche preaches self-assertion. There is truth to that, but let's carefully understand each on its own terms. The Buddha's doctrine of anatta, or anatman, is often translated as no self or not self. It is one of the core insights of his enlightenment. In essence, the Buddha observed that nothing in our experience qualifies as a permanent, independent self. To explain this, he analyzed a person into 5 aggregates, pancakanda: form, physical body, feelings, sensations, perceptions, labels, memories, mental formations, thoughts, intentions, emotions, and consciousness, basic awareness. We normally clump these together and say, I, my body, my feelings, my mind. But the Buddha invites us to examine each and ask, is this truly me or mine? In the Anatta-lakkhana Sutta, the Buddha systematically goes through each aggregate. Bhikkhus, form is not self. Feeling is not self. Perception is not self. Mental determinations are not self. Consciousness is not self. He gives a simple reason. If any of these were really the self, we would have control over them. Were form self, he says, then this form would not lead to affliction, and one could have it of form. Let my form be thus. Let my form not be thus. But we don't have such control. The body ages and gets ill regardless of our wishes. Feelings arise and fade, thoughts come unbidden, etc. Moreover, each of these aggregates is impermanent. The Buddha asks, is what is impermanent pleasant or painful? The monks answer, painful, venerable sir. Then, is what is impermanent, painful, and subject to change fit to be regarded as, this is mine, this is I, this is myself? They reply, no, venerable sir. Here he's making a profound point, because everything in us is constantly changing, and often in ways that bring suffering. Identifying with any of it as I leads to pain. The classic formula in Buddhism is all conditioned things are impermanent, anicca, and all phenomena are not self. meaning nothing that arises and passes, which is everything we experience, can be pinned down as a solid self. The teaching of anatta was radical because most spiritual paths in the Buddha's time, and indeed many today, assume there is some eternal soul or identity, Atman, that is, you. The Buddha saw that clinging to a notion of self is actually the master fuel for suffering. For example, not only do experiences hurt us, but the added idea, I am hurting, or my life is ruined, pours gasoline on the fire. If there is no fixed self, then insult slides off easier, no permanent ego to wound. Loss is seen in a larger context. What is lost if I was an ever-changing process anyway? And even the fear of death is addressed, since what dies if there was no static self to begin with? The Buddha isn't saying you don't exist at all. Obviously, we exist as a flow of experiences and as a conventional person. The Buddha often used terms like person in everyday speech. But ultimately, the notion of a solid me is an artificial construct. It's like a rope that, in dim light, we mistake for a snake. Once we see clearly, the snake of self was just a bundle of changing strands. The goal in Buddhism is not to have an identity crisis, but to loosen the grip of ego clinging. When one realizes, this body, these feelings, these thoughts, they're not mine to keep, not my identity, a great burden drops. There's a famous simile. Carrying the illusion of self is like carrying a heavy sack everywhere. Putting it down is an immense relief. Enlightenment, in large part, is described as the deep realization of anatta, seeing through the illusion of a separate self, which leads to freedom from selfish desire and aversion. An enlightened being, having no I to defend or promote, naturally feels compassion for all and is unattached to the ups and downs of life. When one perceives not self, one reaches liberation, states one text. And the Dhammapada famously says, victory breeds hatred, the defeated live in pain. Happily, the peaceful live, giving up victory and defeat. Without a clinging self, life is not a battlefield of egos. Now, let's see Nietzsche's perspective on the self and ego. Nietzsche does not give a single systematic treatise on the self, but across his works, he weaves a vision of what the human self can be, and what it often is in people. It's important to note that Nietzsche was also critical of the naive notion of a completely fixed, unchanging self, in that he oddly shares some ground with Buddhism. Nietzsche, influenced by modern psychology and his own insight, thought the human mind was a complicated multitude of drives and instincts, often unconscious. He once wrote, "Our body is a social structure composed of many souls," in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, implying that what we call I is more like a society of various impulses. So, Nietzsche would likely agree that the old Cartesian idea of a single, unified rational soul is a fiction. However, Nietzsche does not conclude that there is no self at all. Instead, he suggests that most people's selves are disorganized or externally imposed, and he challenges us to become who you are. That phrase, which Nietzsche loved, originally from the Greek poet Pindar, captures his paradoxical take. Your self isn't something ready-made to discover like a hidden treasure. It's something you achieve or create. Nietzsche's ideal of the Übermensch, Overman or Superman, is intimately tied to this idea of self. The Übermensch is often misunderstood. It's not about a comic book hero or a racist fantasy. Sadly, later thinkers twisted it. In Nietzsche's intent, the Übermensch is a future evolved person who has overcome the limitations of current humanity, especially the psychological dependence on external meaning or herd morality. Man is something that shall be overcome, declares Nietzsche's prophet Zarathustra. Man is a rope, tied between beast and overman, a rope over an abyss. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end. This poetic imagery says a lot. Nietzsche sees humanity not as a final product, but as a bridge between our animal past and a potential higher state, Übermensch. We are a rope over an abyss, meaning it's a perilous journey, not guaranteed. And what is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end. Our greatness lies in the fact we can surpass ourselves. The Übermensch, therefore, symbolizes a self that has been overcome and reconstituted at a higher level. Overcome what? Overcome the petty ego, the laziness, the fear, the slavish adherence to others' values. Overcome the small self to attain the great self, one might say. In this sense, Nietzsche isn't glorifying the ego as it commonly is, full of selfishness, pride, insecurity. He wants to dissolve that and forge something stronger. It's almost like alchemy. The base materials are our instincts and personality, and through self-overcoming, we transform them into a noble spirit. So, interestingly, both Buddhism and Nietzsche talk about overcoming the self, but what happens after is very different. In Buddhism, overcoming the illusion of self leads to no self, a kind of egoless harmony, and the end of individual rebirth. In Nietzsche, overcoming the small self leads to the great self, an individuated, creative, powerful being. Nietzsche's self is very much there, but it's a new self, self-made. He even speaks of giving style to one's character, turning oneself into a work of art. The ego, in the sense of arrogance or self-importance, is actually something Nietzsche often mocks. He famously criticized people who think their I is some autonomous entity when in fact it's driven by unconscious wills. In a sense, Nietzsche might say, the old false self, with its pretensions and borrowed morals, is an illusion to be discarded, but beneath it or beyond it, there is a real self to create. This resonates with his call for authenticity, to reject the herd identity and find one's own path. It's a bit like an existentialist stance. You aren't handed a self, you choose and become it. What would Nietzsche say to the Buddha's notion of no self? He might partially agree that a lot of what we call self is a bundle of forces. Nietzsche was basically a proto-psychologist acknowledging that. But he would be concerned that anatta leads to a valuation that any sense of self is bad. Nietzsche would likely argue, sure, the soul as traditionally conceived may be fiction, but that doesn't mean you should extinguish individuality. Instead, realize that self is fluid and become master of your own multiplicity. Don't kill the fire, but organize the flame into a bright blaze. He spoke of self-mastery, which, interestingly, is also a Buddhist virtue but means different things. Nietzsche's self-mastery means one's higher aspirations rule over the lower impulses rather than some outside God or moral law telling you what to do. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, there's a passage on the way of the Creator where Zarathustra urges people to leave the comfortable and go into solitude to find themselves and create themselves. That is very much the opposite of dissolving into a formless nirvana. It's a call to individual greatness. Nietzsche admired figures like Goethe, Beethoven, Napoleon, not because of their egos per se, but because they were strong individuals who carved their own path and weren't afraid to stand alone. He wanted more of that in humanity, people who could be lawgivers to themselves, who bring forth new values, as the Übermensch would. He even envisioned the Übermensch as the meaning of the earth, a being who lives fully in this world, creating beauty and meaning, not pinning hopes on another world. So, we have a sharp contrast. Buddhist anatta says, freedom comes when you realize the I you cling to is a fiction and you stop taking it so seriously. Nietzschean individualism says meaning comes when you forge an I that is truly yours, larger and more resilient than the timid, socially conditioned self most possess. One might caricature it this way. Buddhism advises, dissolve your ego boundaries. You are not separate. Let go of the self. Nietzsche advises, fortify your spirit. Become more yourself than you ever have been. However, let's not oversimplify. The Buddha's no-self teaching doesn't mean one becomes a non-entity or can't have a personality. Enlightened beings like the Buddha certainly have distinct personalities, but they operate without the attachment and delusion of, this personality is me. They can be fully present and responsive, like an actor who plays a role superbly without believing they are the role. And Nietzsche's self-overcoming doesn't mean indulging every ego whim. It often means disciplining oneself mightily. For instance, if you have a cowardly streak, becoming who you are, in Nietzsche's sense, might mean challenging that part of you, forging courage where fear was. It's not a lazy affirmation of, I am what I am, but a dynamic striving, I am what I become. In that way, there is a sort of ideal self to reach, Übermensch being a distant ideal perhaps, whereas Buddhism would say the ideal is to realize there is no fixed self at all, and therein perfection lies. Let's consider a real-world scenario, identity and roles. Say you are very identified with being, for example, a parent or your career role, or even a nationality. You think, this is who I am. If I lose this, I don't know myself. Buddhism would gently remind you that these are labels, parts of the flow of life, but not a solid self. A parent will one day have an empty nest. If all your selfhood was tied up in parenthood, you suffer immensely when the role changes. Better to see being a parent as a function you fulfill with love, but not cling to it as your essence. Your essence is beyond roles, and ultimately not a fixed thing at all. That insight can help you adapt to change and not cling to identities. Nietzsche would say, whatever roles you have, don't just accept them as given. Ask if they truly express you. And whatever you are, be it fully. If you are a parent, be a creative, life-affirming parent, not one who loses themselves in the role, but one who brings your unique strength to it. And if society's expectations of that role don't fit you, Nietzsche would probably encourage you to break the mold. If your identity, say as a creative soul, doesn't match your current life, have the courage to pursue who you feel you are inside. Authenticity for Nietzsche is key. No self-delusion, no living just to please others or follow the herd. It's fascinating. One path says, find the truth of no I. The other says, find the truth of I. They converge perhaps in that both discourage false ideas of self, the Buddha, the false idea that you have a permanent soul, Nietzsche, the false idea that yourself is just what tradition says or that you're a fixed entity. Both encourage a kind of introspection and inner freedom, but what that freedom looks like is different. Buddhist freedom is selflessness and peace. Nietzschean freedom is self-mastery and exuberance. One might also observe an ethical angle. Without a fixed self, Buddhists often feel a profound connection to others. If I am not separate, why be selfish? Whereas Nietzsche's stress on individual self could seem more self-centered. However, Nietzsche did not advocate cruel egoism. He admired generosity and friendship among strong individuals. He just thought pity and self-sacrifice, when forced by duty, were degrading. Compassion in Buddhism arises from seeing others as like oneself, all part of the process, all suffering in ignorance. Nietzsche's version of compassion might be more like admiration or sharing strength rather than weeping for someone. As we transition to the next section, keep this in mind. The Buddha's path to liberation heavily involves deconstructing the ego, while Nietzsche's path involves reconstructing the self into something higher. This difference in how they view the self will naturally affect their approach to how one becomes free. So now we turn to those paths, the practical methodology each offers for liberation or empowerment, the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path, and Nietzsche's call for self-overcoming and creating new values. Path to liberation. Eightfold path and letting go versus self-overcoming and creation. Having looked at the problem, suffering, and the players, desire, self, we arrive at the practical question: what do we do about it? Here we see the Buddha as a structured guide with a defined program, and Nietzsche as more of a visionary coach, less systematic but intensely personal in his challenge. The Buddha's path to liberation is famously laid out as the Noble Eightfold Path, which is essentially a comprehensive guide to ethical living, mental cultivation, and wisdom. It is often divided into 3 trainings: Sila, morality; Samadhi, meditation; and Panya, wisdom. The 8 factors are right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Right, sama in Pali, doesn't mean right as in dogmatically correct by someone's decree, but rather correct or skillful in the sense that it leads to the goal of reducing suffering. Think of it as an 8-part training regimen for the mind and heart. Right view, or understanding. This is the intellectual grasp of the Buddha's key teachings, especially understanding the 4 noble truths. It means seeing life through the lens of those truths, recognizing that clinging leads to suffering, that actions have consequences, karma, and that liberation is possible. It's not blind faith but a roadmap. Initially, it might be theoretical, but as one practices, it becomes experiential insight, right intention, or resolve. This refers to the proper mindset or motivation. The Buddha highlighted intentions of renunciation, letting go of craving, goodwill, resisting ill will or anger, cultivating loving kindness, and harmlessness, compassion, nonviolence. Essentially, right intention is about aligning one's heart with unselfish, non-harmful motives, which then guide the ethical conduct. Together, those 2, view and intention, form the wisdom segment. Next come the morality pieces. Right speech. Speak truthfully, kindly, and at the right time. Avoid lying, divisive speech, slandering, abusive language, and idle gossip. The Buddha recognized the power of words to either hurt or heal. Right speech is training in compassionate communication. Right action. This involves the ethical conduct of one's deeds. It includes the basic precepts like not killing, not stealing, not committing sexual misconduct, essentially acting in ways that do no harm to others and oneself. It also encourages positive actions like generosity and respect for others' well-being. Right livelihood. Earning a living in a way that doesn't violate ethics. The Buddha explicitly mentioned trades to avoid, such as dealing in weapons, poisons, trafficking humans or animals for slaughter, etc. The idea is that one's daily work should not contribute to suffering. For a layperson today, right livelihood might mean choosing work that is honest and, if possible, beneficial to society, or at least minimally harmful. It ties into the idea of living in integrity, not having to sacrifice your principles for a paycheck. Then comes the meditation/mental discipline segment. Right effort. This is about diligently cultivating wholesome states of mind and curbing unwholesome ones. The Buddha often described it as the effort to 1. Prevent unwholesome qualities like greed, anger, from arising. 2. Abandon any that have arisen. 3. Generate wholesome qualities like mindfulness, kindness that are not yet present. And 4. Maintain and develop the wholesome qualities that are present. In short, it's the constant gentle effort to steer the mind toward the good. Not forcing or repressing, but wisely encouraging the skillful and letting go of the unskillful. Right mindfulness. Mindfulness has become a buzzword today, but in Buddhism, it specifically means clear awareness of the present reality, noting things as they are without distortion. The classic 4 foundations of mindfulness are mindfulness of body, feelings, mind, and mental phenomena. This factor is about developing the ability to observe one's experience, sensations, thoughts, emotions, without clinging or aversion, with clarity and equanimity. Mindfulness is crucial because it allows wisdom to work on the raw data of life. Without it, we're on autopilot, driven by habit. With it, we gain insight into patterns like, oh, this is craving happening, or this angry thought is just a thought, it will pass. Right concentration. This refers to developing deep mental focus, samadhi, often through meditation practices that lead to jhana, states of meditative absorption. A concentrated mind is steady and powerful, like a laser, and it can penetrate into reality's subtleties. In practice, this could involve techniques like focusing on the breath, cultivating one-pointedness, which calms the mind and eventually yields tranquility and penetrating insight. Right concentration supports wisdom by stilling the storm of distractions and emotional turbulence. Together, mindfulness and concentration allow one to not just understand the teachings intellectually, but to see impermanence, suffering, and non-self directly in one's own experience. This leads to the right wisdom that uproots ignorance and ends craving. When developed fully, the Eightfold Path culminates in nirvana, the unbinding from the cycles of craving and clinging. It's a gradual path, not a quick fix, but a lifelong or multi-life practice. The beauty is that it's holistic. It covers how you think, speak, act, work, and meditate. It recognizes that you can't meditate your way to enlightenment if you're living immorally, and you can't be truly moral without mental clarity, etc. The path is often summarized in a motto: to avoid all evil, to cultivate good, and to purify one's mind. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. It's simple but profound. Ethics and inner purification go hand in hand. Now, switching to Nietzsche's path, if we can call it that, we face something quite different. Nietzsche does not present an eightfold path or any step-by-step method. In fact, he would likely be suspicious of one-size-fits-all prescriptions. His whole philosophy encourages individual paths. That said, Nietzsche's writings strongly advocate certain practices or attitudes that together form a kind of path of self-overcoming and life affirmation. Let's try to draw them out. Embrace the will to power. Seek challenge over comfort. A Nietzschean path starts with a mindset shift, valuing growth over comfort. Nietzsche asks us to say yes to life, even its hardest parts. This means deliberately putting oneself in situations that challenge and develop one's capacities. For example, he praised those who live dangerously, a call to venture beyond safety zones. In modern terms, this might mean choosing a career or art or adventure that stretches you, rather than settling for secure monotony. It means when suffering or obstacles occur, cultivate a response of, "How can I use this?" rather than, "How can I escape this?" This attitude is almost the inverse of seeking nirvana. It's seeking out the experiences that will require you to tap into your inner strength. Cultivate your individuality, authenticity, and creativity. Nietzsche puts immense emphasis on becoming an individual. Practically, this means taking time to reflect on your values and beliefs and questioning those inherited from society. Are you living by default, following the crowd? Nietzsche would urge, break away from the herd mentality. This could mean physically spending time in solitude. Nietzsche often uses the symbol of Zarathustra going into the mountains to find wisdom and then coming down to share it. In solitude or introspection, one might discover their true passions and thoughts away from social pressure. Nietzsche celebrates the creative powers of humans, not just artists, but anyone who creates their own meaning. So the path involves identifying what projects, goals, or creations matter deeply to you, and not just what is trendy or expected, and then pursuing those with passion. This is a kind of personal mission or vocation that comes from within. He wants each person to become a kind of poet of their life, to build your cities on the slopes of Vesuvius. Self-overcoming. Face your shadows and push your limits. Nietzsche frequently writes about self-overcoming, Selbstüberwindung. This is an ongoing process where one identifies aspects of oneself that are weak, fearful, or resenting, and works to overcome them. Suppose you recognize in yourself a tendency to envy or spite. The Nietzschean path would have you acknowledge this shadow, then strive to outgrow it, perhaps by developing pride in yourself, or shifting perspective to admire rather than envy those above you, or turning the energy towards self-improvement. That which you fight, you should intend to become a strange but key Nietzschean idea, meaning if you struggle with something, do it in a way that it elevates you. For example, if you're naturally timid, Nietzsche might have you put yourself in circumstances requiring courage, repeatedly, until courage becomes part of you. He often praises strength, courage, risk, and laughter. Become hard, he says, not cruel, but resilient. Revaluation of all values. Create your own values. Nietzsche famously called for a re-evaluation of all values, Umwertung aller Werte. In practice, this means not accepting moral or cultural values just because they are traditional. You, as a potentially strong and free individual, have the right and responsibility to decide what is good for you, not in a shallow, impulsive way, but in line with your authentic self. For instance, society might say success is having a lot of money. You might find you value artistic expression or scientific discovery more. So you'd create a value system where creativity or knowledge is good, and blind pursuit of wealth is indifferent or bad. The Übermensch, ultimately, is a value creator, someone who sets values that uplift life, not values inherited passively from tradition or religion. Amor fati, love of fate and eternal recurrence. A practical mental practice Nietzsche advocated is amor fati, the love of fate. My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. It means accepting every moment, pain and mistake included, as necessary. It ties closely to his thought experiment of eternal recurrence. What if you had to live this life over and over forever? Could you joyfully say, "Yes, I would do it all again exactly so"? That is Nietzsche's test. Are you living a life worth repeating? Unlike the Buddha's defined path, Nietzsche's approach is more like forging your own path. There is no end point like nirvana, where all striving ends. In fact, striving is endless. Even the Übermensch would keep creating and overcoming. Nietzsche's ideal state is not peace per se, certainly not the cessation of desire, but a kind of overflowing vitality. He wrote of a dancing star being born from chaos, symbolizing that a person who has gone through inner chaos and challenges might give birth to something truly beautiful and shining, like great art, ideas, or just a noble spirit. This is a never-ending creative process. It's worth noting that Nietzsche's path is not for everyone in his own view. He recognized higher types and free spirits versus the herd. He wasn't trying to save all beings as the Buddha was. He was more focused on encouraging the exceptional individuals to break free. He had a somewhat aristocratic mindset in that sense. The Buddha, by contrast, had teachings scalable to all levels of society, from monastics aiming for enlightenment to lay people just trying to live a better life, with concepts like good karma, merit, etc., which Nietzsche would probably scoff at. So, in a nutshell, if you approach these paths in daily life, a Buddhist path might have you meditating each morning, practicing mindfulness and compassion through the day, adhering to ethical precepts, simplifying your desires, and investigating the nature of your mind to uproot clinging. A Nietzschean path might have you do something like journaling to question your beliefs, choosing a challenging project or physical regimen to toughen yourself, deliberately exposing yourself to discomfort, like cold showers or difficult conversations, to build resilience, practicing speaking your mind more truthfully rather than conforming, and maybe engaging in creative work that expresses your individuality. One might even surround themselves with stimuli that reinforce a life-affirming attitude, reading great literature, studying heroes, avoiding too much cheap entertainment that pacifies the mind. Nietzsche often extols the nourishment of the spirit with rich, elevating experiences. He loved music, for example, seeing it as soul-stirring. To sum up this section, the Buddha lays out a clear path to liberation from suffering, a moral and meditative training that leads to extinguishing the causes of suffering. Nietzsche lays out an ethos for liberation of the human potential, a call to each person to overcome their limitations, embrace life's challenges, and create their own meaning. The former emphasizes letting go of vice, of attachment, of ignorance. The latter emphasizes rising up in courage, in authenticity, in power. Each path is a response to the human predicament. The Buddha's ends in unshakable peace, Nietzsche's in ever-renewing strength. With the understanding of these paths, we can anticipate that the way each thinker views morality will also differ significantly, since morality is basically guidelines for how to live. The Buddha's morality centers on compassion and the law of karma, supporting the liberation path. Nietzsche's morality is something to be transcended, beyond good and evil, to serve the flourishing of higher life. Let's now compare their moral philosophies and how they advise us to treat others and ourselves in the ethical realm. Moral philosophy: compassion and karma versus revaluation of values. Morality, the compass of good and evil, right and wrong, is another arena where the Buddha and Nietzsche diverge deeply. We've touched on it in passing, but now let's examine each one's moral vision directly and side by side. Buddhist morality is fundamentally rooted in compassion, karuna, and non-harming, ahimsa. The Buddha's ethical teachings are straightforward and pragmatic. Do good, avoid harm, and purify the mind. The rationale behind Buddhist ethics is twofold: intrinsic and karmic. Intrinsically, causing suffering to others is incompatible with the wisdom that understands one's interconnectedness with others, since all beings fear pain and seek happiness just like you do. There's a profound teaching: all tremble at violence. Life is dear to all. Putting oneself in the place of another, one should not kill nor cause another to kill. This verse from the Dhammapada encapsulates empathy as the basis of ethics. Imagine another's pain as your own, and you will naturally refrain from harming. The Buddha encouraged followers to practice metta, loving-kindness meditation, suffusing the mind with wishes for all beings to be well and happy. An arahant, enlightened person, is described as having boundless compassion for every creature. The karmic reasoning complements this. In Buddhism, actions, karma, have consequences not only now, but into future rebirths. Unwholesome actions, rooted in greed, hatred, delusion, lead to suffering for oneself eventually, while wholesome actions, rooted in generosity, love, wisdom, lead to happiness. This is not seen as a punitive system, but a natural law of moral cause and effect, like planting seeds that yield corresponding fruit. Therefore, even if someone doesn't initially feel compassion, they might avoid bad actions, understanding it will boomerang back on them, in this life or another. The Buddha has many teachings illustrating this. For example, someone who lies or cheats might gain in the short term, but they sow seeds of distrust and inner guilt, and in the long run it undermines their well-being or brings about unfortunate rebirths. Conversely, an act of kindness, though it may not be reciprocated immediately, plants seeds of good that will ripen in pleasant experiences and inner growth. So Buddhist morality isn't arbitrary commandments. It's presented as cause and effect reality and also the natural expression of an enlightened mind. The Dalai Lama often says, "My religion is kindness," reflecting that at the core of Buddhism is the transformation of the heart from selfishness to selflessness. Core moral precepts for lay Buddhists include not killing, not stealing, not committing sexual misconduct, not lying, not abusing intoxicants, which cause heedlessness. These are training principles to live harmoniously. They aim to minimize harm and maximize trust, peace, and clarity in society and within oneself. Monastics have even stricter rules, all oriented toward harmlessness, contentment, and simplicity. An interesting thing, in Buddhism, morality, sile, is the foundation upon which concentration and wisdom build. It's said to provide a mind free of remorse. When you know you haven't harmed others, your mind is more at ease, which aids meditation and insight. A key word in Buddhist morality is skillful, kusala, versus unskillful, akusala, rather than sinful or transgression against divine law. An action is unskillful if it stems from greed, hatred, or delusion and leads to suffering. It's skillful if it arises from generosity, love, or wisdom and leads to benefit. This pragmatic approach has a compassionate underpinning. Even when Buddhism says someone's act is bad, it's not that the person is irredeemably evil, but that the act was rooted in ignorance and will cause pain. Therefore, the response is ideally compassion and correction, not eternal condemnation. The concept of karma also gives Buddhism a sense of justice built into the cosmos. Even if human systems fail to punish wrongdoing, karma is working invisibly. But it's not fatalistic, because at every moment one can change and start planting new seeds. This gives a hopeful bent to morality. No one is beyond improvement, and small good actions matter. They can purify past karma's effects gradually. Nietzsche's view of morality, on the other hand, is famously or infamously critical. Nietzsche doesn't exactly have a moral system he wants everyone to adopt. Rather, he wants to free the higher individuals from the confining systems of morality that exist. He distinguishes between master morality and slave morality in his work on the genealogy of morality. This distinction is both historical and psychological. Master morality, the value system of those in power, the strong, think of ancient aristocratic values. In this system, good equals traits like strength, nobility, pride, excellence, bravery, essentially, what benefits and befits a strong-willed person. Bad, not evil, which is a later invention, means weak, low, common, cowardly. It's not driven by hatred. It's more like a lion doesn't hate a mouse. It simply sees it as lesser. Master morality is self-affirming. Nietzsche often cites Greek heroic values or pre-Christian pagan values as examples. Slave morality, the value system of the oppressed, the weak, those without power who feel resentful of the masters. In this system, good is redefined as traits that help the weak: humility, pity, obedience, charity, chastity, essentially what Nietzsche calls the virtues of the weak. And evil becomes a label for what was once good to the strong. Now strength, pride, joy in sensuality, and power are considered evil or sinful. Nietzsche's thesis is that slave morality arose out of resentment. The slaves, broadly those who were subjugated, couldn't overthrow the masters physically, so they did so morally by claiming a higher ground. For example, "You may rule us now, but you are evil, and we are morally superior in our suffering and meekness. We will inherit a reward later, like heaven." Christianity, in Nietzsche's view, was the culmination of this slave revolt in morality. It took the side of the weak and glorified weakness as holiness. Nietzsche doesn't mince words. He sees traditional Judeo-Christian morality, and similarly the moral outlook of Buddhism, as life-denying, because it often elevates weakness and condemns what is natural and strong. He called Christianity a slave religion that has pity at its heart, which he thought preserved and multiplied suffering by valuing it. For example, Christianity and Buddhism both value compassion, pity, chastity, poverty, or at least detachment from wealth, meekness. Nietzsche thinks these came from either decadence or resentment. People who are too weak to enjoy the robust pleasures of life tell themselves and others that those pleasures are bad, while their own state, poverty, chastity, meekness, is virtuous. In The Antichrist, Nietzsche actually compares Buddhism and Christianity and notes Buddhism is more honest because it doesn't preach eternal punishment or hatred of sinners. It's more of a wisdom teaching to ease suffering. He respects that Buddhism is at least free of the intense resentment he saw in Christian moralism. Buddhism doesn't condemn the rich or the strong. It just says they won't find satisfaction that way. However, he still labels Buddhism as a kind of gentle nihilism, a resignation from life, a will to nothingness. The nirvana ideal of extinguishing desire he views as giving up on life's possibilities. So, what is Nietzsche's positive moral vision? Beyond good and evil. He calls for going beyond the simplistic dichotomy that slave morality gave us. Instead of universals, Nietzsche espouses a kind of individual ethics. What is good is what enhances the power and life of an individual. What is bad is what springs from weakness or makes one weak. But since individuals differ, a virtue for one might not be for another. This is very anti-Kantian or anti any universal moral law. Nietzsche admired the idea of higher individuals who create their own values. This is an ethical stance as well as an existential one. For example, Nietzsche doesn't say, truthfulness is always good, or kindness is always good. Instead, he asks, what is it a sign of? If someone is kind out of overflowing strength, like they're so secure and powerful that they can afford to be generous, compassion of the strong, Nietzsche might see that as fine or even admirable. But if someone is kind out of weakness, they're too cowardly to assert themselves, so they call it kindness. He'd say that's contemptible self-deception. Similarly, truthfulness. He values honesty as a personal virtue of the strong who can face truth, but he also thinks illusions can serve life in some cases. One virtue Nietzsche does explicitly praise is courage, the will to risk oneself. Another is honesty, your intellectual conscience. being willing to question even your cherished beliefs. He also speaks positively of friendship among equals, comrades who inspire each other to greater heights, as opposed to the Christian ideal of loving thy neighbor indiscriminately. Nietzsche somewhere said, "You are to love peace as a means to new wars, and the short peace more than the long. You say it is the good cause that hallows even war? I say unto you, it is the good war that hallows any cause." This line from Zarathustra shows how he glorifies struggle, the good war being a metaphor for challenge over comfortable peace. It's almost the polar opposite of Buddhism's ahimsa. Nietzsche isn't pro-violence per se. He's pro-conflict as a generator of growth. He also exalts excellence, the drive to surpass oneself and others, in creativity, wisdom, strength. In a reimagined ethics, cruelty, for instance, isn't automatically the worst evil for Nietzsche. Sometimes he mused that a degree of self-imposed cruelty, discipline, toughness, is part of greatness. Though he abhorred needless cruelty to those who don't deserve it, he wasn't advocating thuggery. In fact, he sneered at anti-Semitic and brute types of his time, even though his sister later tarnished his legacy by associating with them. Nietzsche's critique of compassion, pity, Mitleid, is particularly noteworthy here, since compassion is the crown jewel of Buddhist and Christian ethics. Nietzsche felt that pity multiplies suffering unnecessarily. When you pity someone, you take on their suffering and also perhaps keep them in a place of seeing themselves as objects of pity, which can hinder their growth. He wrote, "Pity stands opposed to the tonic emotions which heighten our vitality. It has a depressive effect. One loses force when pitying." And he worried that a culture of pity, which he saw in Europe influenced by Christian values, would prioritize the sick and weak to the detriment of the healthy and strong, dragging everyone down to the lowest common denominator. Instead, Nietzsche admired what he called Dionysian compassion, a compassion of strength that might acknowledge others' suffering but doesn't get weighed down by it. Rather, it might spur one to help in a way that empowers, not out of condescension. One could argue that Buddhist compassion also ideally empowers. It seeks to help beings find enlightenment, not keep them weak. But Nietzsche likely didn't see it that way. He thought Buddhism's compassion, though calmer than Christianity's, still ultimately sought to alleviate suffering by eliminating desire, something he saw as quelling the flame of life. Karma versus fatalism / amor fati. We should note that Nietzsche rejected the idea of any moral order to the universe, like karma or a god dispensing justice. The universe to him is indifferent and even chaotic. Any meaning is what we give it. So where Buddhism would say, if you do good, good will come to you sooner or later, Nietzsche would say, sometimes terrible things happen to good people and vice versa. Do good, whatever your good is, not because you expect reward, but because it's an expression of your power and character. Nietzsche embraced amor fati, loving whatever happens, because that's all there is. Buddhists, meanwhile, trust in a kind of natural moral equilibrium, even if it spans lifetimes. Nietzsche might have considered the doctrine of karma another form of slave morality's carrot and stick. Be good now for reward later, and suffer now because you were bad in a past life. Though karma in Buddhism is more nuanced than that, he probably lumped it in with other life-denying beliefs. The Buddha offers a moral vision rooted in universal compassion, harmlessness, and mindful action. His ethics are not commandments from a deity, but insights from understanding the shared condition of suffering. To the Buddha, morality arises naturally when one sees that we are all in this together. The motivation for doing good is both pragmatic and compassionate. Wholesome actions bring peace, unwholesome actions bring suffering, and ultimately, liberation is found in cultivating selfless conduct. Buddhist morality is altruistic and collective, visualized as a circle, all beings included in the field of compassion. No self leads to no hard boundary between self and other, so ethical concern flows outward. Everyone, from peasant to king, is equal in their capacity to awaken, and cruelty is clearly condemned. Nietzsche, by contrast, presents a moral challenge rather than a universal framework. He urges individual integrity, courage, and creative self-overcoming. Nietzsche doesn't assume traditional virtues are always good. Instead, he pushes us to ask, do these values strengthen life or weaken it? In many cases, he sees conventional morality, especially pity, meekness, and guilt, as life-denying, tools invented by the weak to restrain the strong. Nietzsche's ethics can be visualized as an upward spiral, the personal ascent of the higher individual who creates their own values. It's not focused on helping others directly, though it might incidentally uplift others through inspiration. The core is self-cultivation. Become who you are. He criticizes much altruism as hidden self-interest or weakness, except when it comes from strength overflowing, compassion of the strong. While critics fear his ideas could justify cruelty or hierarchy, Nietzsche himself was not advocating tyranny. He despised nationalism, herd conformity, and anti-Semitism. His ideal noble spirit might care deeply about culture, beauty, and even others, but without guilt or egalitarianism. So, while Buddhism offers a path where ethical concern arises from dissolving the self, Nietzsche offers a path where ethics arise from magnifying the self. One says, "We are one, therefore act kindly." The other says, "Become great, and let that greatness speak through how you act." The Buddha offers a moral framework grounded in universal compassion, harmlessness, and mindful action. These principles are not just virtuous, but liberating. Because we all share the same condition of suffering, ethical conduct becomes both a path and an expression of wisdom. His morality is collective, inclusive, and healing. A great circle of care where no being is excluded, and kindness is rooted in the insight of no self. When there's no hard boundary between me and you, ethics becomes a natural flow of goodwill. Nietzsche, by contrast, proposes a moral challenge rather than a system, a call to integrity, courage, and creative power. He asks us to scrutinize inherited virtues, to question whether they serve life's expansion or life's diminishment. Traditional values like humility, pity, or equality are not sacred to Nietzsche. They may conceal weakness, resentment, or the desire to restrain the strong. His morality is like an upward spiral, not centered on pleasing others, but on personal ascent that might, through inspiration, lift others too. The Buddha places others' welfare at the heart of morality, because when you see through the illusion of a separate self, helping others is helping yourself. Nietzsche places the flourishing of the self, especially the exceptional self, at the center of ethics, because most altruism, in his view, is either disguised self-interest or timidity, unless it comes from overflowing strength. Some may worry, does Nietzsche's view condone cruelty? Not exactly. While he speaks sharply of the masses and disdains herd thinking, he doesn't call for oppression. He envisions a natural hierarchy of spirit, not ruled by brute force, but excellence without guilt. His ideal figure is benevolent, but unapologetic, like a Renaissance noble who cultivates beauty, depth, and independence without shame. In stark contrast, Buddhism openly condemns cruelty and sees all beings, from the lowliest outcast to the highest ruler, as equally capable of awakening and equally deserving of compassion. In sum, the Buddha, we are all suffering, so act with compassion. Nietzsche, life is struggle, so rise, create, and surpass. Two moral worlds. One begins with letting go of self. The other begins with becoming it fully. And both, in their own way, dare to ask, what does it mean to live well and live truthfully? We can now see that the moral visions of the Buddha and Nietzsche are not just different. They are mirror images built from opposite premises about self, suffering, and strength. The Buddha begins from interconnectedness, that all beings are trapped in the same cycle of craving and sorrow. From this, he derives a path of compassion, harmlessness, and ethical self-restraint. His morality says, do no harm, help all, because you are not separate. Ethics is universal, rooted in empathy and the insight of non-self. He seeks a world where peace and awakening are open to all, peasant and king alike, and where kindness is both natural and transformative. Nietzsche, meanwhile, begins from differentiation, that not all people are equal in will, strength, or spirit. His ethics is not for all, but for the exceptional individual willing to rise above the herd. For Nietzsche, morality should not serve comfort or conformity, but rather create greatness. He asks, does this value make me stronger? His answer to weakness is not pity, but challenge. His ideal is not peace, but power with artistry, a self-shaped soul dancing with chaos. So, the Buddha's moral path is inclusive, compassionate, equilibrium-seeking. Nietzsche's moral challenge is selective, self-affirming, strength-seeking. One sees morality as a way to heal and harmonize. The other sees it as a way to distill power and express life's intensity. And yet, both paths, so radically different, ask us to live more honestly, more consciously, and more intentionally. Whether we are called to let go of self or become more ourselves, both thinkers remind us, morality isn't just about rules, it's about what kind of human being we dare to become. With these moral outlooks contrasted, we have effectively covered the major philosophical differences between the Buddha and Nietzsche: suffering's meaning, desire's role, the conception of self, the method of personal development, and the values that guide our actions. It's clear that at almost every juncture, they propose opposite answers: end suffering by relinquishing desire versus use suffering as fuel for the will, dissolve the ego versus forge a stronger self, follow a compassionate moral law versus create your personal value hierarchy. We can now step back and summarize these fundamental divergences succinctly to really drive home how these two paths part ways. Then, importantly, we'll consider how a person today might integrate insights from both. After all, most of us aren't strictly Buddhist monastics nor Nietzschean supermen, but we face work, stress, heartache, existential angst, and could possibly draw wisdom from both camps. Let's first crystallize the key differences, then move to practical applications for modern life. Deep philosophical divergence summary. To truly grasp the Buddha versus Nietzsche contrast, let's line up their core teachings point by point. Their divergence is not merely theoretical. It runs deep across every major pillar of philosophy: suffering, desire, self, freedom, and morality. Attitude towards suffering. The Buddha sees suffering, dukkha, as the central problem of life, a condition to be fully understood and ultimately transcended. His solution is to end suffering by extinguishing its causes, craving and ignorance. The goal is peace, serenity, and liberation from the cycle of rebirth. In stark contrast, Nietzsche views suffering as inevitable and potentially invaluable, not to be eliminated but embraced and overcome. He argues that suffering can strengthen us, fuel creativity, and forge meaning. "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger," captures his ethos. Where the Buddha seeks cessation of suffering, Nietzsche seeks a transfiguration of it. The role of desire and ambition. To the Buddha, craving, tanha, is the root of suffering. Whether for sensual pleasure, continued existence, or oblivion, desire is seen as an endless thirst that traps us in dissatisfaction. Thus, the path to peace involves cultivating non-attachment and contentment. Nietzsche, on the other hand, champions desire as will to power, a natural and vital force. Ambition, striving, even aggression, in the sense of dynamic energy, are life-affirming. While the Buddha sees desire as a chain, Nietzsche sees it as an engine. He urges us not to suppress the will, but to harness and elevate it toward greatness. Nature of the self, ego. The Buddha teaches anatta, the doctrine of non-self. There is no permanent, independent I. What we call the self is just a shifting collection of body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Clinging to this illusion of self leads to suffering. Enlightenment involves seeing through this illusion and becoming free of ego. Nietzsche, in contrast, encourages self-creation. He acknowledges that the self is not fixed, but he doesn't dissolve it. He wants us to shape it. Become who you are is his call. Forge an integrated, powerful identity from your inner chaos. While the Buddha dissolves the ego, Nietzsche refines and elevates it. Path to freedom, greatness. The Buddha lays out the Noble Eightfold Path, a step-by-step process combining morality, mental discipline, and insight. Its destination is nirvana, the end of craving, suffering, and rebirth. It is a universal path, open to all, centered on inner peace and compassion. Nietzsche offers no universal path. Instead, he speaks of self-overcoming, questioning norms, embracing difficulty, and continually ascending. He calls us to live dangerously, to say yes to life's trials, and to create our own values. Where the Buddha offers clarity and serenity, Nietzsche offers challenge and empowerment. Moral outlook. Buddhist morality is rooted in empathy and non-harming. Ethics means refraining from actions that cause suffering, like killing, stealing, lying, and cultivating kindness, mindfulness, and restraint. Karma reinforces this. Actions have consequences. Nietzsche, however, rejects moralities that come from weakness or herd thinking. He distinguishes master morality, based on strength, nobility, pride, from slave morality, based on humility, pity, and resentment. He calls us to move beyond good and evil and define virtues that affirm life. For Nietzsche, values should elevate, not equalize. Buddhist ethics aims to liberate all beings. Nietzschean ethics aims to liberate the exceptional individual. Boiling it down, the Buddha leads us inward to transcend suffering through peace, renunciation, and compassion for all. Nietzsche urges us outward and upward to rise above mediocrity through struggle, conquest, primarily of self, and creative will. One path finds freedom in extinguishing the fire of craving, of ego. The other finds freedom in feeding the fire until it burns incandescent, of passion, of becoming. These differences are indeed philosophical paradoxes. End desire to end suffering versus use desire to overcome suffering. See the self as illusion versus forge, the self as art. Cultivate compassion for all versus don't be dragged down by pity. It's no wonder that Nietzsche once saw himself as the anti-Buddha, proclaiming that where Buddhism advised quieting the will and avoiding pain, he espoused embracing struggle and saying yes to life's pains. He wanted to be the Buddha of the West in the sense of bringing a healing teaching, but with a very different medicine. Not a cooling balm, but a fiery tonic. After examining these polar perspectives, one might wonder, is there any common ground at all? Perhaps in a subtle way. Both the Buddha and Nietzsche are deeply concerned with human suffering and fulfillment. Both diagnose society's norms as problematic. The Buddha against materialistic, ego-driven pursuits. Nietzsche against herd-driven, life-denying morals. And interestingly, both encourage a kind of fearlessness. The Buddha in facing truth within, even the ego's non-existence, and extending love universally without fear. Nietzsche in facing external challenges and internal demons without shrinking back. Each demands a form of courage. The Buddha's courage to renounce and to know oneself, Nietzsche's courage to rebel and to grow oneself. Yet practically speaking, their advice to someone in pain would differ almost in mirror image. To a man who lost his job and feels despair, the Buddha might say, "My friend, nothing is permanent. Use this loss to understand the transient nature of life. Let go of the attachment to status. Practice mindfulness and compassion for yourself. This pain will pass, and you can find peace independent of external conditions." Nietzsche might say, "Good. An obstacle to test you. Do not pity yourself. That only weakens you. Instead, prove your mettle. Perhaps this is the chance to pursue that passion you buried. Become tougher. Turn your misfortune into an opportunity. A man's worth is revealed in how he rises after a fall. Will to rise." Both perspectives can illuminate in different ways. This leads us to our final segment, bringing these lofty ideas down to everyday life. How can a modern person facing stress, burnout, identity struggles, or relationship issues draw useful lessons from the Buddha's serenity and Nietzsche's audacity? Must we choose one side, or can these philosophies complement each other in practice? Let's explore some practical applications, acknowledging that most of us are not going to become ascetic monks nor Nietzschean Übermenschen overnight. But we can still be inspired and guided by aspects of each approach in dealing with our real problems. Practical wisdom for modern life. The philosophies of the Buddha and Nietzsche might seem abstract or extreme for everyday use, one coming from ancient monasteries, the other from eccentric prose, but they hold practical gems that can be applied to our modern challenges. You, as a 21st century person, likely won't follow either philosophy to the letter. Few of us are prepared to renounce the world entirely or to declare ourselves supermen. However, elements of both can offer profound guidance in navigating work, stress, personal relationships, ambition, and the search for meaning. Let's look at common modern scenarios and how Buddha's and Nietzsche's wisdom might help each in their own way. Burnout and work stress. Imagine you're chronically stressed at work, long hours, high pressure, and constantly feeling on the edge of exhaustion. A Buddhist approach would encourage you to step back and practice mindfulness and balance. You might ask yourself, am I clinging too tightly to career success or others' approval? The Buddha would likely remind you of the middle way instead of all or nothing extremes, like pushing yourself relentlessly or quitting altogether. Find a sustainable middle path. This might mean incorporating short meditation breaks throughout your day to regain clarity. Mindfulness can help you focus on one task at a time, bringing calm presence instead of being overwhelmed by everything at once. Buddhism also emphasizes right livelihood work that does not compromise your inner peace or ethics. If your job environment constantly provokes anger, cynicism, or burnout, it may be worth considering a change. At the very least, you can apply compassion to yourself for not meeting every expectation, and to others to reduce conflict and hostility. You might set boundaries gently, such as allowing yourself to rest instead of constantly striving. Reflecting on impermanence can also help. Will this deadline matter in 5 years? Probably not as much as your health will. The Buddha's voice might say, your work matters, but not more than your peace of mind. Let go of craving for achievement. Do your best mindfully and release attachment to the outcome. A Nietzschean take would sound different. Nietzsche might say that burnout often stems from living by values that aren't truly your own, chasing society's expectations instead of your authentic purpose. He'd ask, is this career your chosen battle? If yes, then approach it like a warrior. Strategize, assert yourself, and find meaning in the struggle. If not, have the courage to pivot toward what sets your soul on fire. Nietzsche would push you to awaken your will to power, not domination over others, but mastery over your own life. This might mean boldly negotiating for fewer responsibilities, asserting your boundaries, or reframing workplace stress as a challenge to grow stronger. He'd encourage you to avoid falling into the herd mentality of workaholism just because everyone else is doing it. Be daring enough to approach work differently, work smarter, inject creativity into your role, or even exit the field entirely if it no longer supports your growth. Better a perilous leap towards something meaningful, Nietzsche might say, than a slow death by routine. His approach reframes stress not as a signal to retreat, but as a call to transform. In short, the Buddha offers a path of mindfulness and measured retreat from harmful stress. Nietzsche offers a path of confrontation and transformation. But both invite you to rethink your relationship with work, whether through detachment or defiance. Facing loss, illness, or personal tragedy. Life inevitably brings loss, whether it's the death of a loved one, a painful breakup, or a health crisis. When deep grief or pain strikes, the Buddhist approach encourages first and foremost a full and compassionate acceptance. The Buddha recognized that separation from what is dear is suffering. Rather than escaping pain, he would urge you to allow it, to feel it, to mourn honestly while watching the process with gentle mindfulness. Over time, reflecting on impermanence can ease the heart. Everything and everyone changes, and loss is not a punishment but a natural law of existence. Though this realization may sting at first, it can gradually bring peace and appreciation for the beauty of what once was. Buddhist practice also encourages compassion in the midst of sorrow. For example, doing a charitable act in someone's name can transform grief into generosity. If you lost a loved one, such an act honors their memory and helps you channel your pain into purpose. Even if you don't believe in rebirth or samsara, contemplating death as part of life, not a failure or unfairness, can help release bitterness. Meditation on compassion, especially toward yourself, is powerful. May I be patient and kind to my own pain. Breath meditation can also help, simply sitting and observing your breath when emotions overwhelm you, allowing the storm to pass without being swept away. The Buddha might whisper, "This sorrow too will change." Keep your heart open. Let it deepen your wisdom and soften your soul. In letting go, you find peace. Nietzsche's response to tragedy would be different, more fierce, but potentially empowering. Having endured deep personal suffering, he might say, "You didn't choose this loss, but you can choose how to respond. Love your fate, this too is part of your story." His idea of amor fati, the love of fate, asks us to embrace all of life, not just the joyful parts. If diagnosed with a serious illness, Nietzsche would challenge you to rise up. This is your worthy adversary. Face it with strength. Let it refine you. If you overcome, you're stronger. if you don't meet the end on your terms. That might mean living more fully, fiercely, honestly. If you've lost someone, Nietzsche wouldn't deny your grief. He'd honor it, but then ask, what now? Can this pain create something? Writing, purpose, art, transformation. The depth of your grief is a testament to the depth of your love. Let that love propel you forward, not backwards. Nietzsche urges, don't collapse into victimhood, be the one who endures and transcends. Use this pain to build something lasting. That could mean activism, or simply becoming a stronger, deeper person. His eternal return test is another powerful lens. If you had to live this moment again and again, could you say yes to it, not because it was good, but because you chose to face it with courage? In short, the Buddha offers healing through acceptance, softness, and compassion. Nietzsche offers healing through confrontation, meaning-making, and strength. These aren't mutually exclusive. You might begin with the Buddha finding steady ground in mindfulness, and later step into Nietzsche's fire, using the pain to rise stronger. Ambition, purpose, and what should I do with my life? In today's world, many people wrestle with finding their purpose or trying to balance ambition with inner contentment. Buddhist advice in this area centers on intention and skillful action. The Buddha would gently ask, what are your intentions rooted in? If you're pursuing a career or goal, examine whether it's driven by ego, greed, or by a wholesome aspiration. Buddhism doesn't say, don't strive. It says strive, but without clinging to results. In this way, you can pursue excellence while maintaining inner peace, because your self-worth isn't dependent on external success. Ironically, this often makes you more effective. You work better without the fear of failure paralyzing you. The Buddha would also encourage service. A worthy purpose often involves helping others, or at least not harming them. So if you feel lost, ask, what can I do that contributes to well-being mine and others? Even simple jobs become meaningful if approached with kindness and honesty. Buddhism also emphasizes contentment, santuti, appreciate what you have before chasing the next thing. This doesn't kill ambition, it ensures your drive isn't an endless void. The Buddha praised moderation and the middle way. Pursue your goals, but know when to say enough. And remember, his ultimate goal was inner awakening. A modern Buddhist might set career goals and also set goals like build a daily meditation practice or practice regular generosity. One exercise could be write down your core values, like compassion, creativity, or family, and reflect on whether your life aligns with them. If not, shift course. Meaning, the Buddha assures, arises from cultivating goodness and awareness, not from chasing status. Nietzsche, meanwhile, would take a different but equally passionate stance. If life has no given purpose, create one. For him, this wasn't a burden, but freedom. He would tell you to find what sets your soul ablaze. If you feel lost, perhaps it's because you're living someone else's story. Nietzsche would urge, stop following the herd. Try things, take risks. Learn that unusual skill, travel. Start that art or business project you've dreamed of. Live your life as a work of art, not in the shallow social media sense, but in depth drama, growth, and creative expression. To someone unsure of their path, he might ask, what can you give the world that only you can? What challenge will forge you into the person you want to become? Struggle is part of this search. Nietzsche wrote, become who you are by testing your limits. That means stepping out of your comfort zone regularly. If you already know your passion, then Nietzsche says commit to it fully. Don't dabble. Give your energy to it as if your life depends on it. Let it demand sacrifice. One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. Nietzsche also believed purpose must be personal. Don't chase someone else's dream. A helpful practice he might suggest: imagine your ideal self or legacy, however bold or impossible it seems, and ask, what small steps can I take toward it now? Even if the world laughs, he'd say, aim high, shoot for the stars, dancing ones, even if others think it's absurd. Taken together, Buddhism prevents ambition from becoming toxic or self-destructive, keeping you anchored in compassion and balance. Nietzsche, on the other hand, keeps your contentment from turning to stagnation, lighting your spirit with fire and boldness. A wise person might say, I work hard and dream big, Nietzsche, but I stay grounded and I don't cling to outcomes. Buddha. Relationships and attachment. Interpersonal relationships, romantic familial friendships, are a source of both joy and pain. The Buddha's advice here often revolves around the concept of attachment upadana. He'd caution that while love is beautiful clinging, or possessiveness in love leads to suffering, separation from loved is dukkha, so he'd encourage loving without clinging. In practical terms, that means giving your partner or loved ones freedom, not attempting to control them, and recognizing they, like you, are impermanent beings who will change. By appreciating the present moments with them without trying to freeze them, you enjoy a more harmonious bond. The Buddha also emphasized metta, loving kindness, and karuna, compassion, as attitudes to cultivate in any relationship. For example, in conflict, instead of reacting with anger, try to respond with understanding or at least restraint. Also applying the golden rule in the Dhammapada, put yourself in the other's shoes, since all want to be happy and not hurt. This tends to soften resentment and encourage forgiveness. Buddhism also teaches non-attachment to outcomes you might wish for, say a relationship to last forever, but you handle it more gracefully if you accept uncertainty. This doesn't mean being detached in a cold way. It means you fully love someone but recognize you can't own them or guarantee permanence. Paradoxically, that understanding makes you cherish the relationship even more and likely makes it healthier. In practice, a Buddhist relationship tip is communication with mindfulness. When you listen, really listen fully present. When you speak, do so truthfully and gently. Also, share in each other's good karma, encourage each other's positive actions and growth. If a couple practices even a bit of meditation or compassionate reflection together, it can deepen their bond beyond surface attachment into a more unconditional love. The Buddha's view of ideal love is wanting the other's genuine happiness and spiritual well-being, not just satisfying your needs. In parenting, similarly, a Buddhist approach fosters love with wisdom, knowing your child isn't your possession, but a person you guide who will have their own path. That helps in eventually letting them go with love when the time comes, instead of unhealthy attachment. Nietzsche on relationships would cut through any overly sentimental view. He might say something like, in any relationship, especially romantic, beware of losing yourself. A strong friendship or love should be between two whole individuals who challenge and elevate each other, not two halves clinging out of weakness. He had a famous concept of marriage of spirits, where the highest form of marriage is one where each partner wills the other's will, meaning they support each other's independent growth and goals, not smother each other. So practically, Nietzsche would likely encourage honesty and even tough love. Don't flatter or coddle your loved one's weaknesses. Help them overcome them and let them do the same for you. He prized friendship perhaps even over romantic love, because friendship in his ideal is about mutual respect and pushing each other higher. For romantic love, Nietzsche warned about the traps of idealization. He believed men and women often misunderstood each other by projecting fantasies. His controversial, "When you go to woman bring the whip" line was partly critiquing how men fall slave to women by idealizing them and vice versa, and he wanted more authenticity and forthright negotiation in love. Nietzsche might say, better to face the power dynamics in relationships openly than to hide behind false niceties. In modern terms, be real about your desires and don't become subservient or domineering. Strive for a dynamic interplay of two powers. He would despise a relationship that makes you complacent or too comfortable. If you abandon your ambitions or individuality just to keep peace with your partner, Nietzsche would say you're betraying yourself. Instead, a great relationship should spur both to greater heights. Think of a power couple not in status sense, but in inspiring each other's personal evolution. If your friend or partner sees you slacking on your dream, Nietzsche would encourage them to give you a jolt, not just say, "Oh, that's okay, dear," and vice versa. Also, Nietzsche values solitude. He'd remind you not to fear being alone. It's better, in his view, to be alone than to settle for a mediocre or stifling companionship. That courage to be alone ensures that if you're with someone, it's from strength, not desperation. For example, if someone stays in a toxic relationship out of fear of loneliness, Nietzsche would vehemently push them to get out and stand on their own. You carry chaos and potential in you. Don't let it stagnate in unhappy union. Better to walk alone on your upward path than together on a downward one. Summarily, Nietzsche's relationship advice is about independence and challenge within connection. Love as two stars orbiting a common center, shared values or goals, rather than collapsing into one blob. That way, love doesn't weaken you, it fuels you. Marrying the two, perhaps an ideal relationship, could have Buddha's heart and Nietzsche's spine. A lot of compassion, patience, and selflessness, combined with honesty, vitality, and support for each other's individuality. These applications show that while Buddha and Nietzsche differ in day-to-day life, their insights can complement each other more than we might expect. There's a time for letting go. When something is beyond your control or causing you neurotic pain, the Buddha shines there. There's a time for powering through. When you face a challenge that can be overcome with will and bravery, Nietzsche roars there. There's a need for compassion. To nurture relationships and community, Buddha is the guide. There's a need for assertiveness. To stand up for yourself and break new ground, Nietzsche is the coach. Even in one person's life across phases, one philosophy might resonate more in younger years. Nietzsche's call to adventure may propel you. In later years, Buddha's call to peace may soothe you, or vice versa. Ultimately, both the Buddha and Nietzsche want you to live more authentically. The Buddha believes your authenticity emerges when you remove greed, hate, and delusion. Then your natural radiant self, full of compassion and wisdom, shines. Nietzsche believes your authenticity comes when you rebel against convention and sculpt yourself. Then your unique creative self shines. Different methods, perhaps. A common end, a human being who is free from psychological suffering, in one case, free from social and self-imposed limitations in the other. Now, we'll wrap up by reflecting on the profound journey we've taken, comparing these two titanic minds. We'll consider what we can personally take away from this duel of philosophies. And to give you a last taste of their voices, we'll close with a memorable thought from each, perhaps a gentle reminder from the Buddha, and a stirring exhortation from Nietzsche. Words to carry with you as you navigate your own path between suffering and power, between letting go and holding on. Conclusion. We began with a paradox. Can the will to power free you from suffering? After journeying through the minds of the Buddha and Nietzsche, we've seen two radically different answers. The Buddha would likely say, true freedom comes not from asserting your will, but from understanding the nature of desire and self, and relinquishing the cravings and illusions that bind you. Freedom for him is an inner peace beyond suffering, attained by letting go, a gentle state of non-clinging, often described as nirvana, the cooling of all fevers. In this freedom, one acts out of compassion and clarity, no longer driven by compulsive wants or torments of ego. The end of suffering is possible, and it's found in the cessation of the very will that Nietzsche champions, a profound quieting and contentment in the present moment. Nietzsche, on the other hand, would respond, suffering is not a chain to be broken by negating the will. It is a test and catalyst to be met with even greater will. In Nietzsche's vision, will to power can indeed free you from suffering, not by eliminating pain, but by transforming your relationship to it. It frees you from being a victim of suffering. Instead, you become an active creator who can say yes to hardship and mold it into meaning. Nietzsche's freedom is an exuberant freedom for self-determination, for risk, for growth, rather than a freedom from every distress. It's the freedom of the Übermensch who overcomes himself, and in doing so overcomes the human condition as we know it. In that conquering the sting of suffering is transmuted into fuel for excellence. Can the will to power free you from suffering? Nietzsche would say yes, not by making suffering vanish, but by making you the master of your suffering so that even pain becomes part of your power. As different as these answers are, they need not be mutually exclusive in our lives. The warm compassion of Buddhism can soothe the heart even as the fiery determination of Nietzsche can stir the spirit. We can learn when to apply acceptance and when to apply will. Some moments call for Buddha's patient equanimity, others for Nietzsche's defiant amor fati. Armed with both perspectives, we navigate life with a fuller toolkit, the serenity to accept what we cannot control, and the courage to control what we can, and the wisdom to know which is which. In closing, let's hear final whispers from each teacher. The Buddha, ever compassionate, might remind us in his own words, by release from craving, sorrow and fear come to an end. A gentle nudge that if we find ourselves in suffering, the answer often lies in letting go somewhere, in softening our grip and finding refuge in love and insight. And Nietzsche, ever the invigorator, might leave us with his rallying cry, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. Embrace your struggles, he urges, for within them lies your creative spark, the very energy that can illuminate your life. So ask yourself in your own journey, when do you need to sit beneath the Bodhi tree of quiet understanding? And when do you need to climb the mountain and shout your will into the wind? Both the Buddha and Nietzsche stand ready as guides, one with a gentle smile of compassion, the other with a wild smile of challenge. By learning from both, you just might find a path that leads not only out of suffering, but into a life of depth, resilience, meaning, and dare we say, even joy.